Today's speaker is Sophie Grace Chappell. Sophie is a philosopher at the Open University. She is the author of a number of books, including Epiphanies, and her most recent book from 2024 is Transfigured. You're here to listen to Sophie, not me, so I won't say much about Transfigured, except to say that I think it's a very timely and important book, one from which I've learned a lot, a philosophical work in the truest sense. In a political period characterised increasingly by cruelty and by cowardice, Transfigured is a book that called this reader to greater empathy and courage. I now hand us over to Sophie Grace Chappell. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. What week is it in Oxford?
5.
It's week 5. Well, remembering my own time as an undergraduate in Oxford, though not in this college, I want to say thank you very much to those of you who are undergraduates and have come, because I know that things get more and more hectic and more exhausting the more the undergraduate term goes on. Mind you, when I was an undergraduate, it was at least the official fiction that nobody worked. And I came back and gave a talk in Oxford not long ago, and it was a Friday night, and we went out for a meal after my talk, and the streets were deserted. It was all quiet, and I said, "Where is everybody? Why aren't people partying?" Because they're all working. Oh, blimey, things have changed since I was an undergraduate. But anyway, thank you for coming. When I was undergraduate, the only people who worked officially and admitted to working were the medics and the DPhil students, who both had a sort of hunted look to them. Everyone else was partying, or at least pretending to. So, I've written a book called Transfigured, and I have not succeeded in doing what I planned to do, which was to get some discount codes if you want to buy it printed out. The publisher sent me them, and they're sitting in my email in tray, and I haven't done anything with them. But if anyone would like a discount code to buy my book, just email me and I'll give it to you, and we can pass it on that way. Emailing me isn't very hard. It's sophie-grace.chappell@openacc. You'll find it on the OU website. So, I'm a somewhat unconventional philosopher. I'm a somewhat unconventional person. And one of my eccentricities is that sometimes I do philosophy via poetry. And another of my eccentricities is that I like to give as many papers as I can the titles of rock songs. Silly old twit that I am. I tend to do that. And I started off calling this paper, What is it like to be transgender in the UK in 2025? And I ended up calling it Somewhere They Can't Find Me, which is, of course, a Simon & Garfunkel song. And as you'll see, Somewhere They Can't Find Me is a rather haunting song, because it's about the need to escape, the need to get away from some kind of pressure. The song doesn't tell us what. And I think that's something a lot of us feel today, especially the way things are going at the moment. And pretty badly. Everything is terrible. And I want to start with a poem which gets this sense of being in a position where we're being forced to take a very unwelcome journey, or soon will be forced to take a very unwelcome journey where we don't know the destination. It's a poem about some children who felt just that once. I've been reading a history book by Julian Jackson called France, the Dark Years, and this is a quotation from that book which stands to introduce the poem. The children in Drancy invented the name Pitchipois for the destination of which they knew so little. Actually, Pitchipois, but never mind. That's an incomplete quotation, but first I'll read the poem, which has 5 stanzas, 16 lines, and just the one rhyme. It's always useful with a poem to know what's coming. As Philip Larkin says somewhere, if you read it on the page, you can see it on the page, you can see what you're getting and how long it's going to go on. Only 16 lines, I assure you. So this is called Pitchy Poi. Where are we going, we ask, but coy our parents are, and quick annoyed. So we just call it Pitchy Poi. Not much tune news, much decoy. No school for us, and no employ for our papa till Pitchy Poi. Not much here for us to enjoy. Playgrounds, nurseries, all destroyed. We dream of better at Pitchy Poi. Shouted at by the rude tall goy, sometimes struck if we annoy. We wait for the kindness of Pitchy Poi. Soon we all, each girl and boy, will be transported to the joy, to the ingenious new toy that awaits us all in Pitchy Poi. That's the poem, and to complete the quotation, the children in Drancy invented the name Pitchy Poi for the destination of which they knew so little, but which we know as Auschwitz. Now, I'm not, of course, for a moment suggesting that things are as bad as that today for trans people in the UK. Not that bad. Not today. Not yet. But everyone's noticed there are plenty of neo-Nazis around. And there are also online commentators around who think that doctors who offer trans-affirming healthcare should face capital punishment for it. That's Matt Walsh, a self-proclaimed Christo-fascist. Plenty of fascist, not much Christo. We might not be in 1941, but we are in 1934, or something like that. Transgender people in Britain today can't go online or open a newspaper or leave our own homes without risking being policed, blocked out, surveilled, denounced as a threat to others, or, as Elon Musk charmingly puts it, a woke mind virus. An army of bitter and spiteful activists awaits us in the press and social media, in our schools, our colleges, our workplaces, our pubs. Everywhere we go, there are people telling us what we can do and how we can dress, and where we can't go and what we don't understand about ourselves. We're excluded from pubs and clubs and changing rooms. We're excluded from family gatherings, quite often, unless we dress in a way that meets with others' approval. If we go on a train, we risk getting jostled and jeered at. If we walk down the high street, we risk getting punched or confronted or catcalled. If we play sports, we're hounded and demonised and disqualified and blocked out. If we seek healthcare, we find the world's longest waiting lists. If we try to get counselling, we find ourselves at the mercy of conversion therapists in a way that no one would tolerate for gay people for 30 seconds. If we post online about what it's like to be transgender, our posts are immediately swarmed by a cloud of commentators whose remarks quickly betray their deep hostility to trans people, and who seem to have no obvious qualifications to speak about us, apart from their willingness to pontificate at inordinate length about the lives of other people. We're told that our very existence is a debate by newspapers that only ever publish one side of that debate. We're told that we're a threat to women and to minors by people who otherwise display no interest whatever, either in safeguarding young people or in combating violence against women. We're accused of being predators with no evidence by convicted sex offenders who drool publicly over young women, including their own children. We're told that trans people can't have the honesty, humility and self-discipline needed to serve in the military by draft-dodging fraudsters and compulsive liars who themselves have absolutely no track record of honesty or humility or self-discipline whatsoever. And I might be thinking of one individual in particular there. We're told that trans people and trans healthcare providers and those who write about trans in an affirming or positive way, like me, we're told that we're only in it for the money by people who literally pay their mortgages by monetising being anti-trans and often making a very lucrative career out of it. Open any newspaper in the UK at the moment. Almost certainly you'll find an opinion piece about how awful trans people are, in one way or another. We're told that respecting trans people's names and pronouns is a woke tyranny. That was the Daily Telegraph about a week ago. Hooray for the end of the woke tyranny, this article said, because Trump's arrived. Woke tyranny. We're told this by people who have no protest to offer at all, about the many countries in the world today where simply to be visibly transgender is to risk literal execution by literal tyrants. We're told that being transgender is a denial of science by people with no interest, apparently, in looking at what the very large scientific literature on sex, gender and transgender actually says. We're told that gender-affirming healthcare is unsafe for trans people, while gender-affirming healthcare is routinely offered to cis people, and when the very same medications as are used in trans healthcare are considered perfectly safe in every other application except trans healthcare, mysteriously enough. We're told that trans-positive parents are brainwashing and grooming their own children by far-right activists who themselves look rather brainwashed to me, and whose track record when it comes to children is often pretty worrying. And so on, and so on, and so on. It's mind-numbing, it's spirit-crushing, and it's meant to be. That's the point. Every day it's the same torrent of lies and abuse and disinformation. Pretty much every day for the last 10 years or so, the UK mainstream press has been publishing anti-trans articles. Pretty much every week for that last decade, some UK legal or quasi-legal process has been weaponised against trans people. And as a spectator of this anti-trans obsession that now dominates the Conservative Party and Reform, they're not about Reform, the other way of abbreviating their name is REF UK, which, given that they let us into Brexit, has always seemed rather apt to me. There's this anti-trans obsession dominating the Conservative Party and significant sections of the Labour Party too. Not to mention the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Times, and indeed the Spectator. And you do begin to wonder, what is it with these people? When trans people are something like 1.5% of the population, roughly twice the population of Germany in 1933 who were Jewish, how and why did transgender become such an obsession for these hard-right gender ideologues? And just how far are they prepared to go? If some other country traditionally allied to the UK suddenly started a fairly serious legal and political effort to erase transgender people altogether, would the UK anti-trans activists be on board with that? I'm afraid I think we're getting our answer at the moment. A substantial proportion of the so-called gender-critical movement. I'm very keen on terminology. Never let the other side have the good terminology. Rationalist. Don't let anyone else have that word, unless you're actually an irrationalist. Gender-critical. I'm gender-critical. I'm profoundly gender-critical. I mean, what could be more gender-critical than doing this? Anyway, they call themselves a gender-critical movement, and only a few years back they were telling us that trans people could wear whatever clothes we liked and be whoever we want to be, and that if we were oppressed, they would march with us. And now they're full of glee at what's going on in the US. They're delighted to see it. As American trans people face a serious and credible threat of being handed out of visible existence altogether, in the country that calls itself the home of the free, the land of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, the one place above all in the world where you're supposed to be able to develop your own vision of what life is about and pursue that, has suddenly become a kind of home of repression. And the gender criticals in the UK, as far as I can see, are beside themselves with glee about this. The only people who are more delighted than they are is Vladimir Putin. Steve Bannon, the fascist agitator and convicted criminal, Steve Bannon, has publicly said that it's his strategy to flood the zone with shit. That is, to overwhelm ordinary decent people with so many egregious outrages at once that they don't know which to respond to. So what's going on with all this shit? Trans people are targeted, but we're not the main target. The real target is everybody. Trans people are centred by the polemicists of the right because we're visibly different. Or at least those of us who are visibly different are visibly different. Never forget that a substantial proportion of trans people are not on the transvestigators' radar. a substantial proportion of trans people just aren't visibly trans and therefore aren't spotted. And so when they tell you we can always tell, no they can't, and they prove again and again that they can't tell. They prove again and again that they're getting it wrong. Some of us are visible, I guess I am, but a lot of us aren't. But the purpose of making us, the visible ones, the focus of a moral panic, is to distract everyone from what's really going on. It's to get us to focus on our ignorant fear of each other instead of focusing on the people who are really deceiving and cheating us. A friend of mine on Facebook called Peter Critchley recently posted some quotations from a book I didn't know before Peter Critchley talked about it on Facebook, called The World Still to Win, which is from the 1980s and is by Jeremy Seabrook and Trevor Blackwell. It's not the least of capitalism's achievements, they say in that book, that it leaves its subject peoples in debilitating dispute about illusory antitheses and unreal dichotomies, which can only truly be understood when their roots are traced back to that system which must forever create false contradictions in order to conceal its true ones. It's only in real people's anguish and torment that the workings of the system are glimpsed, and then only partially. For even at this level, the system would have us so misrecognise the nature of our afflictions that we ourselves perceive them as personal problems and individual disorders. We are being taught to think that our problems are not what they actually are. We're being taught to think. Lots of people in the last US election were taught to think, and very effectively, that trans people were a problem of theirs, and not having enough money to make the rent. That wasn't on the radar, or if it was occluded by this moral panic about trans people. So the point of the moral panic about trans people is to distract us. But that's not the only point. It's not just to distract us, it's also to accustom us to being lied to. Because there's something very anti-tyrannical about the truth itself. I want to say something quickly about that. This might be the kind of thing that interests your next speaker, because this is a theme that I get from Plato, amongst other places. One of the deepest and most important loyalties demanded of us by the virtue of justice is loyalty to the truth. Facts matter, reality matters, as gender-critical people like to say. And again, I'm not giving up facts or reality to them. On the contrary. The tyrannical spirit cannot endure that people should be loyal to the truth rather than to the tyrant. It can't bear that anyone else should bow the knee to anything except the tyrant, and above all not to the truth, because the truth might involve pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. I think that helps to explain the blizzard of absurd and preposterous lies that the tyrannical spirits are currently subjecting us to. Why do they lie so insistently, even about things of no importance? Because to have the truth, even about matters of no importance, or little importance, like the correct name of Denali, or the Gulf of Mexico, these are the only things under the Trump administration that there are complaints about you dead naming. To have the correct names of these things is to have the truth about anything, is to have something of great importance, because the truth is egalitarian. When a plain and non-celebrity me has got hold of the truth, then I've got hold of the very same truth as the fanciest tyrant in the world, if he cares to look that way. The truth makes them answerable to the rest of us. The truth puts an epistemic responsibility on them, as philosophers like to call it. And they can't bear that. To be proved wrong, to be overpowered by the truth, to have to change course because they're wrong. How humiliating. So they lie even about little things, to train us to have no king but Caesar, to have no loyalty to anything but their cult, not even the truth, and to break our competing adherence to that dangerous and terrible thing, objectivity. They think they can buy everything, but the truth is not for sale. Magna est veritas et praevalebit. Great is the truth, and it will prevail. Up is not down, the sun rises in the east, the earth is round, not flat, murder, mendacity, theft and violence are wrong, And not even $10 trillion can move these facts. In the words of Dermot McCulloch, fear is generally fear of the unknown. Knowledge is like a medicine to soothe the fever. The better we understand each other and the more we have access to the truth, the more we will calm down and see things with a measured and careful eye, not a hysterical one. But the aim of the liars and the tyrants is to put us in a state of constant hysteria. Well, that's all been rather gloomy so far. Perhaps this next poem, perhaps, I'm afraid you missed the first poem, but you get the second poem. Perhaps the second poem will lighten the mood a little, because this is less gloomy, at least a bit less gloomy. This poem rhymes and scans, and it has 20 lines, and I wrote it for January the 20th, 2025. So it's called Inauguration Poem, and you may notice there's one rhyme it doesn't use. Inauguration Poem. We hoped, as humans will, for high ideals that make corruption take a running jump. For a mastermind, not a ragbag of loose fields for whom the long term's just till the next hump. We hoped the future would send us its herald, one by whom our hopes might be moved on, through whom our songs and dreams could be well channeled. We were not looking for a sleazy con. We hoped, as humans will, to ease our thirst from the pure, clean spring, not the stagnant, rotting sump. You poison every well, leave rivers cursed. A stream to you is a place to take a dump. We hope for someone who'd speak loud and clear for all of us, on everyone's behalf. Not set the white on black, the straight on queer. You cheat our hopes. You even cheat at golf. We hoped, as humans will, for inspiration, for a Lincoln orator genius on the stump. Not boastful, vacuous, free association. We hoped for a champion. We got a chump. Did I say light relief? Less than a month on, and to be honest, that poem now seems over-optimistic to me. I think we're dealing with something worse than a chump, in the light of what's currently being done to the valiant and long-suffering people of the sovereign nation of Ukraine. I'm thinking not so much of a chump as of a traitor. So maybe try again to lighten the mood, to cheer things up a bit. Here's my good friend, the Canadian sociologist, Amy Kaler. I've been teaching the sociology of gender at the University of Alberta for 24 years, which means I know more about gender than anyone in the new Trump government. Today's executive order, rambling on about trans people and gender ideology, this was from, I think, from about January the 21st or 2nd, is not just crude and mean and deranged, it's unnatural. Even if it were compassionate and noble and coherent, it would still be unnatural. Trans people didn't just blink into existence when social justice warriors uttered some sort of summoning spell a few years ago, and so it's not possible to blink them back out of existence by government overreach and ideological stomping around. What I know for sure, and I have 24 years of receipts, is that trans people, people whose lives do not correspond to two rigid and exclusive physical sex groups, have always existed. And by always I mean always, at any place and time where human communities are found. The two-sex framework we're familiar with today accommodates most people, but has never accommodated all people. This is so consistent across all known human societies that I'm tempted to say that gender expansion, or binary nonconformity, or whatever you want to call it, is one of the very few human universals, along with, I don't know, kinship, or metaphorical language, or the use of tools. The idea that all humans are born either male or female and remain exactly so for their entire lives is a fantasy. It's not based on how people actually are, as I know from years of reading historical, anthropological, and biological research. It would equally be fantasy to insist that all people have brown eyes or right-side dominance. I'm left-handed and blue-eyed myself. Most people, yes. All people, definitely no. Like I said, every known human society, thousands of years of human history. You can't executive order your way around this inconvenient piece of reality. Trying to get rid of transgender existence through draconian state overreach is like trying to get rid of the colour yellow. So the foot soldiers are set to do all manner of harm in pursuit of something which is not just immoral, but impossible. The reduction of all Americans to two and only two and determined before birth and nothing else matters, groups. This is profoundly antisocial and unnatural, and if Trump or anyone else really wants to protect women, this isn't how. Well, if you're here as a cis ally, or as a cis person, maybe not necessarily an ally, just someone who shows up because they're interested. If you're not trans, or if you've otherwise had the good luck to be insulated from all this bad news, you might be thinking, what does all this trouble about trans people have to do with me? Well, it has plenty to do with all of us. I've already pointed out that the point of the torrent of lies that we're currently being subjected to is to numb us to the distinction between truth and falsity. The point of the moral panic about trans people, as with other and even more vicious moral panics, like the one about migrants, is to divide us and fill us with anger and fear about each other, instead of about the people who actually are cheating and deceiving us. And by the way, though I am trans, and though I'm prepared to stand up and speak out on this issue, as you see, I don't actually think that if we have to do a competition of which is the most important issue facing us in the world today, I don't think it's trans. I think it's the environment, and pretty obviously so. That doesn't mean that, fortunately, life does not come in priority lists, in top of the pops lists, and we're allowed to devote ourselves to more than one cause at a time. And things that aren't the most important cause of all can still get a look in. And often what you find is that things play into each other, things relate to each other. But the point of the torrent of lies that we're being subjected to is to numb us to the distinction between truth and falsity, to blind us to people who are actually cheating and deceiving us. And immigration, I think, and the whole treatment, the whole racist treatment of people who have been made homeless or for one reason or another want to change the land they live in. What's so bad about being an economic migrant? Can someone explain that to me? Money is allowed to move across borders. Why aren't people? Why can't we do that? The United States was founded on economic migrancy. And now it's a bad thing. You want to come here to make money. Yeah, that's kind of the point of America, isn't it? Isn't that the idea of America? Neil Acheson once said, talking about the government's treatment of refugees, never forget, this is how they treat you if they thought they could get away with it. And the boundaries of what they can get away with are very far from permanently fixed. Chandran Kukathas argues in a wonderful book, Immigration and Freedom, there's no such thing as surveillance only of one group in society, immigrants or migrants or trans people or whatever it is. A surveillance society surveils everyone. Immigration control is not merely about preventing outsiders from moving across borders, it's about controlling what outsiders do once in a society, but controlling outsiders requires regulating, monitoring and sanctioning insiders. The more vigorously immigration control is pursued, the more seriously freedom is diminished, and that means everybody's freedom. Attacks on the rights of minorities not only pave the way for attacks on everybody's rights, they are attacks on everybody's rights. So, for related reasons, when we turn away from all this gloom and doom to consider remedies, responses, and defensive measures, the remedies that I want to recommend are not just remedies for trans people. They're remedies that we all might pursue, trans, cis, unsure, or whatever. Perhaps there are even lessons here that the cis people might learn from the trans about how to survive in an increasingly tyrannical and bigoted society. We're faced with the threat of a new kind of techno-fascism, a broligarchy with a deep interest in extraction. That's the point of the attacks on Canada and Greenland. It's their rare earth metals that really interest him. The oligarchy has no concern at all with the independent sovereignty or democracy of nation states. So we need resolute and brave leaders to resist all this. And the lack of such leaders of the resistance, I find both surprising and alarming. People are beginning to stand up and be counted, but we are really rather short of people to lead the resistance to what's going on in front of our eyes. Who's the leader of the free world? Against those, including the President of the US, who used to get the title leader of the free world pretty much ex officio. He's now threatening both our freedom and indeed our world itself. Who's the leader of the free world? I'm not quite sure. Donald Tusk? Ursula von der Leyen? Vladimir Zelensky? It's not clear. It's a harder question to answer than it ought to be. We need leaders. There's not much that the middle-aged philosophy professor can do about remedying that leadership vacuum, of course. But what I can do is talk about a remedy that it might seem a little of a performative contradiction to mention out loud. And that remedy is evasion. I'm going to suggest that some of the time what we should do is indeed, in the words of Monty Python, run away, run away. Not all the time, but there is a time for seeking refuge. There is a time for getting away from all of that. There is a time for emptying your head of all the hatred that you're confronted with and taking a time out from the fight and finding some peace. And this is something that we trans people have had to get quite good at. We have to survive. You can't stay sane if you spend your whole life 24/7 fighting the bullies, because the bullies are everywhere. And that's what they want. And a very good rule for any kind of conflict is do not do what you want to do what your enemy does not want you to do. Work out what that is. And online, they want us to fight. They want us to get bogged down. They want us to be up to our necks in 101 online conversations. Usually, of course, they turn the onus of proof upon us. The onus of proof is one of the first things that gets reversed. You have to prove. I come up with some simple slogan. You have to come up with a 750-word essay explaining your more nuanced and subtle position, to which I will then respond with nothing but a jeer emoji and ask pretty much the same question again. I will condemn you, if I can, to endless, futile labour. Sometimes we should fight, sometimes we should run away. Trans-hostile people want to control what we call ourselves, what pronouns we use, how we understand ourselves, how others understand us, our bodily autonomy, our access to healthcare, our voting rights, our place in society, and the rest of it. Where trans people are concerned, cis people in our society want to control everything. And it's because the opposition is so comprehensive that we trans people have to learn which gatekeeping battles to fight and which to bypass. I'm just going to take a little detour here, quick sidebar on bodily autonomy. This is something that I wanted to get into the paper. I thought I had got it in, but I don't seem to have. So I'll say it anyway. Our society at large is not at present, maybe this will change in a bad way, but at present our society is not in doubt about the basic right of bodily autonomy in most cases. For example, no one doubts that a 14-year-old victim of sexual abuse who is pregnant, she has the right to decide what happens to her body in that situation. We don't have any problem about allowing 14-year-olds, maybe younger even, depending on circumstances, we don't have any problem about allowing them autonomy over their own bodies in the case of abortion. We're being told that trans people are not to be allowed bodily autonomy until they're whatever preposterous age it is they've pushed it up to now. At least 18, sometimes I hear 21. Sometimes you hear, oh, but the brain hasn't fully developed until people are 24 or 25. So we can't have people deciding to transition because they might regret it. Sidebar to a sidebar, coming in a moment. First point, nobody says that about abortion. Nobody's allowed to say that about abortion. You would be howled down if you tried. Why is it okay to say that about trans people and their decisions? Second point, they're coming for abortion rights. And they have explicitly said that that's what they're doing in various documents that you can find in the documentation of the Christian right, who are behind all this nonsense. They want to get rid of what's called Gillick competence, which is the basic rule in English law that allows people young girls who have suffered sexual assault to seek an abortion, even at quite young ages. They want rid of that. Of course they do, because they're Christofascists across the board. So, bodily autonomy, that was my sidebar. And there was something else I wanted to say at this point. And what was it? Oh yes, the constant upping of the age at which we're said to be capable of making decisions that we won't regret. The regret rate for surgery in general, the background regret rate for any kind of elective surgery, is about 14%. The regret rate for trans surgery is 1%, or thereabouts, maybe even less. But trans surgery, gender-affirming surgery, is somehow this dreadful disaster in medical ethics that we mustn't allow because of the risks involved, because of the risks of regret. This isn't any kind of sense that they're talking. This doesn't add up at all. I could get an operation for piles, and there'd be more chance that I would regret that than gender-affirming surgery. I don't incidentally need an operation for piles. We don't need to go there. But against this background of sheer nonsense that we're being exposed to by hostile agents, there's only so much protesting, petition signing, letter writing, and indeed talk giving, or talk attending, that any sane, normal and non-fanatical person can be expected to do. And it's a kind of disadvantage that most of the trans people labour under, that unlike the anti-trans ideologues, we're not fanatics. I'm not a fanatic. I want to talk about Plato. I want to talk about ethics. I want to talk about epiphanies, and I often do. Being trans is just something that I want sorted. It's an aspect of my life that I just want out of the way. Like living in a nice house. You sort it out, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. It's part of the background of your life. It doesn't have to be in the foreground, because you're not constantly fighting for it. That's what I want, and that, it seems to me, is the opposite of fanaticism. So confronted with hostile gatekeeping by fanatics who want to insist on their right to hold you to account and get you to show your papers at every bloody turnstile they can think of, sometimes you should just hold the barrier. Sometimes the thing to do is resist, take it on, protest, fight directly. Sometimes the right thing to do is not get bogged down in a head-on and quite possibly unwinnable collision. Evade the gatekeepers and seek refuge. At the same time as fighting, for many of us the immediately practical option is to evade. You stop worrying about the life you can't have and the ingredients that you can't access. You get on with building the life that you can build, with the materials that you do have to hand, and you stop worrying about what you can't do and can't get hold of. And I know quite a few trans people who are like this about gender recognition certificates. They're told that what they have to do in order to be affirmed by society is prove that they've been sufficiently trans for long enough, stand up in front of a committee, who may or may not be sympathetic, of cis people, who will then rubber stamp their right to be trans. And here's the thing about the GRC process, there's no appeal. I don't know if you know that. I mean, maybe I got this wrong, but as I understand it, there's no appeal. So if you go up before a gender recognition committee and they knock you back, that's it. You've failed. You've failed to prove that you're trans. Now, I think quite a good and sensible reaction to that kind of gatekeeping is, if you'll excuse my Lancastrian, bugger that. Bugger that. Why should they get to decide who I am? Why should they have the power over my life that no one else has in any comparable situation that I can think of? So there are people who are trans and have just avoided the whole GRC route, the whole medicalisation route, for the same reasons that I'm talking about. They haven't gone to the doctors, they're not on hormones, they don't do any of that. It's all too ferociously gatekept to be worth engaging with. That's a view that some people take, and it's a form of what I'm calling evasion. And it seems to me perfectly legitimate. And if, in the next 20 years, we get plenty of complaints from the Daily Mail that there are too many trans people around who don't, quote, look like a proper woman, or, quote, look like a proper man, I think the answer to that is, and whose fault is that then? Why do you think that's so? You made this mess. These people wanted to go as far as they possibly could. You stopped them, and now you're blaming them because you stopped them? Get out of here. And those of us trans people who end up in a situation like that, we won't have everything we wanted, but we will at least perhaps have some of it. And we won't have had to crawl to get it. A little bit of pride there, perhaps. But why not? Why shouldn't we be proud of being who we are? Why shouldn't we refuse to humiliate ourselves in front of unsympathetic panels of supposed experts? Why shouldn't we say, this is my life? And it's a matter of my bodily autonomy, again. I'm going to live it. And you're not going to tell me how. And that's why we all need, all of us sometimes, some of us all the time. I have trans friends who are much more activists than I am. I also have trans friends who, for whatever reason, they say, good for you that you go out and fight, but I can't face it. I can't face it. I just want to be at home. I just want to be in a safe space. I don't want all this crap in my face every single day. I just want my life where it's safe to be me. Some of the spaces that we need to find will simply be spaces for rest and for relaxation, and some of them will just be spaces for comfort. And here's a poem about that sort of comfort. Here's another plug of another book I've written. It's a collection of poems called Songs for Winter Rain, and a friend of mine runs a small press, and she flattered my vanity by publishing my poems for me, which I was very pleased about. And they do sell the occasional copies, so, you know, poetry is always a very hard thing to sell, even if it's Faber and Faber. Unless you're literally Simon Armitage or Seamus Heaney, it's very hard to publish poetry. Anyway, this is a little poem about a refuge of a kind. It's called Song for Winter Rain. On the black hill and the brittle wood, on the draggled heron by his unwatched mere, on silent hen louses and unlit farms, the rain pours down tonight, but not in here. On the oily roofs of locked-up factories, on the steaming flanks of a ghost train vacant bus, on potholed lanes, orange-shadowed by springing trees, the rain pours down tonight, but not on us. On black horse breakers no one ever sees, on what the storm does, solely for the storm, on the empty decks of midnight's groping ships, the rain pours down tonight, but we keep warm. So rub but briefly at the clammy pane, spell jokes and songs, refill the cups again. Pile high the crammed log basket, stoke, and let black hails hiss out their spite in our golden grate. That was a poem that I wrote when I lived in Lancashire, and the rain in the poem is very definitely Lancashire rain. It rains a lot in Lancashire. I grew up in Lancashire. And there's a lot of little old mill lodges with battered old woods that have got through the Industrial Revolution somehow, and are kind of half dead and half alive behind those lodges. And it is the kind of place where you might find a decidedly bedraggled heron. And it was to do also with cycling back from Manchester University when I worked there. I lived in, of all the wonderful place names, Ramsbottom, and I used to cycle home from Manchester University and get very wet. And it was thinking of the contrast between being so wet on that bike ride and getting home that made me write that. And no, in case you're wondering, I don't dress like this when I'm cycling. Some of the safe spaces I mean will just be comfortable, like that one. No doubt what I described there is the kind of safe space that a family or a marriage will provide when all goes well. Some of them will be rather more active and strenuous places, perhaps like an Oxford college. And none the worse, indeed all the better for that. There's more to life than a golden grate, however grateful we may sometimes be for. I want to appeal, and this is kind of the end of things, the end of this lecture anyway. I want to appeal to 3 resources, just to show you what I mean by these spaces, where we're seeking a kind of refuge, where we're not manning or womaning or non-binary personing the barricades. We're finding a refuge, we're finding a way out. Here are 3 resources to help us understand that. First, 2 Aristotelian ideas that I think Aristotle himself underplays. I'm just translating the Nicomachean Ethics as a kind of fun time exercise. I'm in book 4, and it is so boring. There are really boring bits in Aristotle. I'm just in the bit about great-spiritedness, where Aristotle's saying that the great-spirited man has a deep voice and a slow, measured walk. And I think, how did we get here? A minute ago in the history of philosophy, or it only seems like a minute, we were talking about the theory of forms, and now we're talking about the ideal person having a slow gait. What the hell's going on, Aristotle? Anyway, there are other reasons for objecting to Aristotle, which are familiar to those of a feminist persuasion. Nonetheless, there's good things in Aristotle. There's a lot we can get out of him. Aristotle, but we have to bend him a bit. 2 Aristotelian ideas that I think he underplays. He has this tripartition of friendship in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 8. He says there's the friendship of advantage, the friendship of honour, and the friendship of virtue. And all the time he wants to look up the hierarchy to the top of it, and that is a bad habit he got from Plato. All the time he's looking upwards towards the ideal case and ignoring the other cases, and I think that's regrettable. I want to explain why. The friendship of advantage and the economic friendship, these are, the friendship of advantage or the economic friendship and the friendship of honour, these are the kind of things you get in a business, that's the friendship of advantage, or in a political partnership, that's the friendship of honour. And I think those are both valuable ideas. I think there might be a lot of good in society. Suppose we take another idea, this is my second resource, right from the beginning of Nicomachean Ethics, the idea of a nested hierarchy of crafts or skills or practices, technai in Greek, each of which has its own purpose, its own telos. And now you get exposed to my translation of Aristotle. Every craft and every inquiry strives towards some good, and these different goods all have different ends, but the ends that they have form a hierarchy. They all fit together. If there's some end of actions that we want in itself, and we aim at other things only because of this end, and if we don't always choose everything with something else, then it's clear that this that we choose for its own sake would be the good and the best. So we need to know about that if we're going to do ethics. We need to describe what a good life is, so we need to know what the one good is for the sake of which we pursue all the other goods. Now, I am an anti-theorist in ethics, and that means that I'm sceptical about this kind of system building that Aristotle's involved in here, and I want to say, who says there's only one good that's all of the same set? Why can't these different kinds of activities, economic friendships or partnerships, crafts where we're working together to achieve some honourable end, like getting new blades in torpids or something like that, practices where we are working together for some intellectual good, like understanding. They're different kinds of things. Why, dear Aristotle, do we have to think of them as a hierarchy? Why not think of them as a network? Why not say human life is composed of a network of practices? We do a bit of this, we do a bit of that. We go to the croquet club and play some croquet. We go to the folk music group and play some folk music. We come to our tutorial with our essay brilliantly prepared and eloquently expressed, and we do some philosophy with our tutor, or whatever subject it may be, and that's all splendid. There doesn't have to be a hierarchy. Life is just a mosaic. It's not a hierarchy, it's a mosaic. of these different activities. And we don't have to drain the goodness out of the partnerships of monetary advantage, and we don't have to drain the goodness out of partnerships of honour for the sake of some one thing called the good, capital D, T, capital G, which turns out to be middle-aged, middle-class intellectual men like Aristotle talking with each other about philosophy. Funny how Aristotle thinks that that is the good. It's exactly what he is most preoccupied with himself. Why not lose the snobbery? Maybe if we look down our noses at everything all the time, our perspective on them will be a little bit warped. Why not have a life which is a network of different activities? And now we come to my third resource, because I want to put these together with the idea that I was talking about, the idea of refuge. We're all engaged in different kinds of skilled activity, practice, life that we share together, life where we try to achieve things together, like philosophical understanding, or good music, or a good game of croquet, or reading a book together in a book club, or better working conditions if it's a trade union. In all these activities, we are finding contexts for the techni in which the differences that matter are the differences related to that particular craft or activity. Other differences don't matter. What race you are is irrelevant in those contexts. Whether you're gay or straight, cisgender or transgender, is irrelevant in those contexts. And this is a feature of the good that Aristotle could have said a lot more about. It's a pity he didn't. That when we're engaged in some techne or other, it's the standards of that techne that matter, and nothing else. I don't care which country you're from. I don't care whether you're gay or straight. I don't care whether you're trans or cis, provided you can play in tune. Because this is a folk music group, and we're trying to perform Tam O'Shanter, and you keep playing a bum note. That's what concerns me, not your race. So, safe spaces, I think there's a natural connection between the idea of a practice or a techne and the idea of a safe space. And this is it. That in those safe spaces, we are not excluding people because of irrelevant considerations. We're including them. The techni can be inherently inclusive. And the techni, as I said before, we don't have to think of them as a hierarchy. We don't have to think that the study of philosophy is the only one that counts. We can recognise all sorts of different contexts as being places where we realise value together, where we create something that's worth having. And part of my thinking here is directed by two experiences in my own life. And one of them is playing a rugby team, and given my status at the time, it was a boys' rugby team at school. I was very struck by the way, as soon as we were on that pitch together, it didn't matter what we thought of each other outside that context. And I was someone who was thought to be a bit peculiar, no doubt justifiably. And I was, I suppose, bullied. I was on the receiving end of a lot of invective anyway. That all dropped away on the rugby pitch. On the rugby pitch, we were playing for each other. And that was what counted. And out of that, this is the thing that I'm saying here, out of that context, there emerges a pressure towards mutual recognition and mutual acceptance, which we can harness and use, and we can spin that out into other areas where perhaps things are not so enlightened, and you're still getting jeered at in the corridor of your school. But the fact that you're respected in a context like that can infect other contexts in a good way. And it can make a context like that a safe space. And the second thing that has made me think about this particularly is my eldest daughter plays in a folk group. She used to play in a folk group here in Oxford called the Starlings. She's moved to Catalonia. And folk music is an important part of her life. And I see just this practice structure that I'm talking about in what switches her on and what she's engaged in. It is just that kind of structure where people come together and a safe space is built around the performance of folk music together. And I think that's rather marvellous. And I think we need more of that in society. And when we run away, when we seek refuge rather than resistance, it doesn't have to be in a cosy place like the Golden Grate in the poem I read. It can be in a context like this where we're achieving things together. And these can be contexts where everybody is in a safe space. So a fortiori, they're contexts where trans people are in a safe space. And the last thing I want to say, and my timing is impeccable because I have 2 minutes, is to quote Alistair MacIntyre, a passage which has puzzled many people from the end of After Virtue. A crucial turning point occurred when men and women of goodwill turned aside from the task of shoring up the Roman Imperium and ceased to identify the continuation of civility and moral community with that imperium. What they set themselves to achieve instead was the construction of new forms of community within which the moral life could be sustained, so that both morality and civility might survive the coming ages of barbarism and darkness. If my account of a moral condition is correct, then we've reached that turning point. What matters at this stage is the construction of local forms of community within which civility and the intellectual and moral life can be sustained through the new dark ages which are already upon us. The barbarians are not waiting beyond the frontiers. They've already been governing for us for some time, and it's our lack of consciousness of that that constitutes part of our predicament. We're waiting not for a Godot, but for another, and doubtless very different, Saint Benedict. Now, I don't want to go all the way with MacIntyre in this passage, and in fact, if you talk to MacIntyre these days, if you can get him to talk about philosophy at all, he's now very old. The last time I emailed him, I said, "Look at my new essay that I've written, Alistair," and he replied, "I am 92 and no longer have time to read new philosophy." Fair enough. But Alistair MacIntyre has said explicitly in things he's written that he's not advocating a complete retreat from all engagement with the wider world. But he is saying that we need to find places where we can rest, recuperate, refuge, and recharge. And that's what I'm saying. We need to man the barricades or person the barricades sometimes. We also need to find ways of renewing our joy, of renewing our resources, because we are in a very nasty and very widespread battle for the defence of something like morality and civility, for the defence of something very like Western culture and civilization. And that is a hard fight, and we need to find ways of doing that. And finding our communities, finding our safe spaces, whatever they may be, and I've suggested some things they might be. A church is another thing they might be. A political party area group might be such a grouping. Finding our safe spaces, finding our communities is essential if we're going to stay alive. And one reason why you know this is important is because of all the forces trying to stop it happening. Library closures, the closure of every kind of public space, the closure of every kind of place where people might meet to do things together in the kind of practices that I'm talking about. These are all under relentless attack by the forces that are now in charge in our society. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because they recognise the power of the community-based. They recognise the power of what people can do in all sorts of directions when they come together and learn to do some activity together which involves that kind of mutual respect and that kind of egalitarianism. So even our refuges are likely to face attack, but that just witnesses the vital importance of building those refuges, both as refuges and also as itself a form of resistance, a way of finding a soul in this increasingly soulless world. So if you're waiting for revolution to come from outside, a top-down transcendent intervention, stop waiting and start building these communities of refuge and resistance wherever you can. The revolution is not top-down, it's bottom-up. It's not transcendent, it's imminent. It's not, or not just, external, it's internal too. It starts in our refuges, somewhere they can't find us, but it can and will break out to transform our wider society if we start from that basis. The revolution comes not from above, but from below. Not from outside, but from inside. And it can start here and now. Thank you.